Okay. Good morning, everyone. Again, yes, thank you for joining us. The second panel of the China, working group. The second panel theme is internal dynamics and international connections. We have scheduled 4 presentations today, but there are 2 presenters who are currently not here yet, neither online. So I hope they will join us very soon. But for the interest of time, I think we will just make a start now. So we have 4 papers today. First one is from Professor Yongqi Feng. He's from University of Jilin. He's joining us from China. The paper he's presenting today is the influencing factors of offshore RMB overseas demand, theoretical framework and empirical analysis. The second paper is from Tomás, Costa de Azevedo Marques. Sorry, probably pronounced his name wrong, but yeah, Tomás can introduce himself. His paper is a political economy perspective of the 5-year plans and the inward FDI regulation policy. Third paper will be from myself, Sam-Kee Cheng. Title is China Economic Reforms, Purposes and Limitations. The last paper will be from Alicia Girong. Her paper is China, Indebtedness and Overdue Portfolios in the Post-Pandemic. Okay, without further delay, I will hand it over to Professor Feng. Professor Feng is joined by his colleague today as well. Professor Feng, please.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Feng Yongqi from Jilin University in China. I'm honored to attend this conference, although I meet you online. This research is a teamwork, so please allow me to invite my partner Zhang Tianshu to make this report to you. Because I think her spoken English is better than me. So please.
Thank you. Thank you for Professor Feng, and nice to meet you, everyone, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm Zhang Tianshu from Jilin University, and it's very honored to make this report today. The topic of our research is the influencing factors of RMB overseas the title of our research is Influencing Factors of RMB Overseas Demand, Theoretical Framework and Empirical Analysis. And my report will include 4 parts. First, I will introduce the research background, and second is the theoretical framework we set up, and the third is the empirical analysis, and the last, the conclusions and suggestions. About the research background, the reason why we make this research is we wonder such problems. The first problem is that the offshore RMB market development can help RMB internationalization to be realized. If it does, are there any conditions need to be met? We learn from the experience of Japanese yen, and the development of offshore financial markets may not necessarily effectively promote currency internationalization. After the establishment of Tokyo offshore financial market in Japan, a so-called relanding game was formed between the yen offshore market and the onshore market. That is domestic funds flow from onshore to offshore, and then from offshore to onshore. Such capital circle will not fully realize currency internationalization. And the effect of promoting RMB internationalization through RMB offshore market, as the scholars think, is not as significant. Some scholars also raise the questions that how to make a choice between the mode of the trade settlement plus offshore market, or the capital export plus multinational enterprises. So achieving RMB internationalization through the development of offshore markets, we think it must enhance the externalities of RMB network, promote overseas demand for RMB, improve the ratio of RMB corporeal circulation in the offshore market, and facilitate the third-party transactions of RMB in the offshore market. And the next problem is how to estimate the main two ways of offshore market construction and development: policy, promotion, or and the market role. Because it is impossible for the development of RMB offshore market.
I'm sorry to interrupt, because we can only still see your first page of your PowerPoint. Have you proceeded to other pages? If so, yeah, we didn't see it. Okay, yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. So, as we know that it is impossible for the development of RMB offshore market without the policy promotion. However, relying only on the promotional policies to build and develop the offshore RMB markets will not only consolidate the market foundation for overseas RMB demand, but also cannot significantly promote the realization of RMB internationalization. So we think another important role is the market role. The market role is promoting the development of the offshore markets has been more and more obvious recently. So again, we learn from the Japanese yuan's experience. In the process of yuan internationalization, the demand of offshore yuan is single and mainly Japanese multinational enterprises. So due to the backward financial development level in Japan, the operation mode of internal and external separation of offshore and onshore markets has been adopted. And this mode of offshore yuan finance is an important reason for the failure of yuan internationalization. So we get another finding that the core condition for realizing RMB internationalization should be that the RMB can have extensive overseas market around. And a third problem is
sorry.
And the third problem is in current station, the RMB internationalization are meeting the bottleneck, and how to make it break through it. In this chart have shown that since the year of 2015 to 2022, the performance of cross-border RMB index performs not satisfactory. And we can also see this situation from such three index, such like the share of RMB international payments in the global market, and the ratio of RMB settlement in cross-border trade to total import and export. And the third is the scale of offshore RMB deposits in Hong Kong, China. So we make our own research, and in our research we try to answer such questions, such like how to measure the current scale of RMB overseas demand, and how to increase RMB overseas demand, and what are the factors that affect RMB overseas demand. Can overseas demand for RMB be steadily boosted only by speculation and the real transactions? Then we construct the theoretical framework of influencing factors of RMB overseas demand. We made a previous study about our topic from two aspects. The first aspect is from the research on the influencing factors of RMB overseas demand, and the existing influencing factor are recognized, that such like exchange rate level, expected fluctuation of exchange rate, and trade surplus and RMB settlement scale of cross-border trade, foreign direct investment policies such as RMB internationalization, and economic fundamentals. And another very important influencing factors we have focused on our paper is currency credit. I will show it in detail followingly. And the other aspect is the research on the measurement methods of RMB overseas demand level. So then we tried to construct our own theoretical framework, and these are the theoretical basis for currency demand, such like the Keynesian monetary demand theory, currency substitution theory, and other theories related to the sovereign money credit. Based on such theory, our theoretical framework shows like this. We sorted the influencing sectors into three tabs, and also we sorted the currency demand into three tabs. And these two items in the relation one-to-one correspondence, such like speculative demand belongs to short-term factors, and the real transaction demand belongs to mid-term factors, and the sovereign currency credit belongs to long-term factors. And such kinds of demand, we call it overseas demand for currency, and this is why we need to and the overseas demand for currency is the a very important motivation for currency internationalization. And this slide shows the three mechanisms of our RMB overseas circulation. When the RMB flow, the RMB overseas flow are dominated by policy factors and by market factors. For the first step, we can see that the RMB outflow from onshore market to the offshore offshore market. To the offshore market, we call it is it is dominated by policy factors, and this mechanism is dominated by policy factors, and the offshore market RMB. The offshore RMB self-circulation mechanism dominated by market factors. And the third, the offshore RMB return to onshore market, and this mechanism is dominated by policy factors. To testify our hypothesis and frameworks, then we make the empirical analysis. In this part, we have done 3 items of work. The first is we measure the level of RMB overseas demand. And second is we construct the RMB currency credit index. And third is a very important part is the empirical test on the influencing factors of RMB overseas demand. And the mode and the method of measurement and time range, data resources and data processing are shown in this slide. So for the time reason, I will directly skip to the part of conclusions and suggestions. And these are the process of our research. So according to our study, we have got such conclusions. The first is the level of RMB overseas demand has differentiated performance at 3 currency levels, and the level of RMB overseas demand is more sensitive to fluctuations in the exchange rate than RMB. The level of RMB overseas demand has risen rapidly since August 2015 and has always maintained a relatively high level. And the second conclusion is speculative demand is the short-term influencing factor of overseas demand for RMB. And this influence will gradually weaken over time. And with the improvement of real transaction demand and currency credit, its influence will converge. And the third conclusion is real transaction demand is the medium-term influencing factor of overseas demand for RMB. And its impact on overseas demand for RMB has the characteristic of time lag. And the fourth is RMB currency credit is the long-term influencing factor of overseas demand for RMB. And the RMB currency credits index shows a fluctuation upward trend. However, the overall level of the index is relatively low, and this role in enhancing overseas demand for RMB is not significant. And the last is the reform of the RMB exchange rate is conducive to improving the level of overseas demand for RMB. But international tensions and trade frictions will not only hinder cross-border trade, but also affect the RMB exchange rate, which is not conducive to the improvement of overseas demand for RMB. So last, we put forward our suggestions according to the currency internationalization. First is improve the exchange rate formation mechanism and improve the supervision mechanism for the operation of foreign exchange market. First, we can gradually promote the market-oriented reform of the exchange rate and reasonably guide the exchange rate expectations. And second, we can strengthen the construction of offshore market supervision system. And second suggestion we put forward is continue to maintain the stability and continuity of the cross-border RMB policy, and steadily promote the opening of the capital market and form a favorable RMB trade and investment environment. First, we can improve the RMB settlement business for cross-border trade and expand the scale and the scope of RMB use with the help of Belt and Road and RCEP. And second, we should continually improve the financial market and related legal system, improve the construction of offshore and onshore capital markets, enrich the range of RMB products that foreign investors can invest in and trade, and further enhance the international appeal of RMB assets from the perspective of value preservation. And the last, we suggested that we should further enhance the currency credit of RMB, take practical actions to promote China's concept of mutual benefit and the win-win results, establish China's image of a responsible and honest country, and endorse the internationalization of RMB with its continuously improved national strengths. So that's all my reports. Thank you for hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang and Feng. Okay, we are proceeding to the next presenter, Tomás. Yes. Thank you. Okay. Yes, can you find where it goes? Think first.
The presentation mode.
Yeah, I think it's the next one.
This one.
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. Good morning for everyone. My name is Tomás, and I'm going to present part of my research. This is a research that is ongoing, so I don't have finished it yet. And it's also part of my PhD thesis that this part of the work I'm calling the Asian Dragon's Invitation. It's a political economic perspective of the inward FDI regulation policy and the 5 years plan. The structure of the presentations, I have 20 minutes left. Yeah. And the structure of the presentation is that one, theoretical debate and approach, contextualization, and then I analyze the 5-year plans in the open door policy. And I mean, I look at the 5-year plans, trying to understand how they plan the openness process, and then I look at the regulation policy for inward FDI. And then in the 5th session, I have a data analysis showing some graphs, some economic impact, and final considerations. So far, the regulation policy for inward investment adopted by the People's Republic of China and the FDI have been analyzed by looking at the regulation policies from the institutional theory and transnational cause to explain the reform process in the country. So I have some examples of other authors that have analyzed from those perspectives. A few studies have tried to a more heterodox approach as a way to understand FDI in the People's Republic of China and economic growth. So because it's mainly, and also the mainstream use the FDI to say that the FDI is an important tool for development. And what I'm trying to understand is how the regulation policy adopted by China became a tool for development. So trying to understand what's the whole of FDI in the development of China from this perspective.
Sorry, Thomas, I think you haven't shared it. PowerPoint, so
really?
Yeah, the other people couldn't see it online. Just need to.
True, you're right.
Yes.
I don't know how to do that actually. Okay. Okay, this one. So I use some authors from the political economy perspective to debate this policy, and also to try to understand the whole of the state in that strategic of development as far as I understand it, and as far as it's writing on the 5-year plan that I will show you. But mainly the idea here is like what we have, that transnational corporations use foreign direct investment to organize and control the production chains, extracting the value, generating these locations. So basically FDI is a tool for transnational corporations to make profit. And that's why they go abroad, to maximize the profit. And in that context, the government tried to extract benefits of it. So how the FDI of this search for profit that the transnational corporation do could help, and how does the government manage with that? And the whole of the state is a central issue in that context. So from my perspective, what I'm as looking at these 5-year plans and the regulation policy and now this debate of development and the FDI and the whole of the FDI, I understand the regulate foreign capitals, subordinating them to the national objectives of economic development and political independence. It's a key issue. Well, the context we also know, but I think what's important here is to show that foreign direct investment, or the investment that come from abroad, and when I say foreign direct investment, I'm talking about the productive investment, and it's something that came and start like these cooperations between China and then foreign nations after the revolution. So in the beginning, there was a series of cooperation projects between China and the Soviet Union mainly, but also from other Soviet republics until the 60s, when started the Cultural Revolution, and they changed their approach with the foreign nations. And also this idea that we have may seen in many other places of the reforms and the full modernization was something that was presented by Zhang and Lai. And in some way also Mao has this perspective of the importance of technology, foreign technology and foreign knowledge for the modernization of the country. But in the political sense, this was what we popular known as the open door policy, started led by the Deng Xiaoping policy. So here I will share with you some context of the 5 years plans, but starting from the period of the Deng Xiaoping influence in the Communist part and what we call the open door policy. And I will start showing, because the first 5 year plans, the plan that was written before the period of the open door policy, but was adopted during this process, was the 5th 5 year plan. And after that, the sixth 5 year plan was the first one that was writing during this period of the open door policy. And here I highlight some of ideas, some topics that appear during this 5 years plans that are directly connected to the open door policy. And then, as we may see forward, it's related to the regulation policy adopted by the government. Like in the 6th 5 year plan, promote the application of new technologies. So from the beginning, was clear in the 5 year plans that technology was a key issue for the development of China and the importance of foreign technology and foreign knowledge for the development of China. As you may see, this is clear. I took this text from the 5 year plans. I mean, 5 year plans, they are not all publicized. So many of the 5 year plans was translated by third part, and some of them I haven't managed to find it available, the full version. So also this is a limit of my research, because it's not easy to find the whole 5 year plans, but I found some of them, and some of them are a short version of it, and some are from official, many are also, I think all of them are from official sources, but not the full version. And so it's clear from the 6th 5 year plans, the idea of introducing advanced technology. This is another word that's important, advanced technology, that will appear in the regulation policy also. And you have like these different phases, the idea of starting of special economic zones also as a trial to as part of this open door policy also appear in the 5 year plan, and the idea of reform as a way to develop. So this is another thing that we should understand. The reform, I didn't say, but in the slide before, there's a phrase that the open door policy is not to promote free trade, but it's the opposite of it. It's to promote development. So this is also an important key. And so it goes on, you know, the idea in the 8th 5 year plan, you have high technology development as a keyword, and it goes on. But one thing that you can know, that this idea of gradually open domestic markets also start to appear from the 9th year plan. So there's a first moment that they said, okay, we need the foreign technology to promote our development, and the reform should be connected to this idea of development. So the reform should lead to development, and then after that promote more openness. So the idea of openness is not in the sense that most of us are used to in the mainstream theory of this idea of free trade and those things, that it doesn't work. The idea here on the 5 years plans, this openness for the capital, for foreign investment, to transfer of technology, to advanced technology, to high technology, and to managerial skills from foreigners, to understand to use these tools to develop in our country through foreign direct investment. But it's also, as we see here, it's something that is clear on the 5-year plans, the main two that they use to plan the whole macroeconomic things of the economy. And the idea, as you can see in our more recent plan from the third 5-year plan, you may see that the idea of development socialism. So this is right there. The idea of the government that should play a more effective role in the development of this foreign direct investment regulations. A new and a better open economic system will take shape. This is the last 14-year plan that shows this idea that is transforming of a trial, and I will show you later. It's appear in the laws. This idea of shaping, trying, giving some steps back, and then giving steps forward, and always trying, open, closing, and open more. But from what we learned from the 5-year plan, that this direction of openness, it's appeared in all of the 5-year plans since the 5th one. And how this works in the regulation policy, because the 5-year plan is a macro, and then the regulation policy for inward investment is something that's more specific. It's directly to transnational corporation that want to invest in the country. So this is all documented, this is all open, this is public. But and this is clear because there are a lot of myths behind that and it's important to, when you read it, to understand that those myths, how to understand that these are all of things that they say, stolen technology and bullshit, because all of these is contractual thing. So from the beginning, when a company wants to invest to get in China, that's clear. The law says that they should transfer technology, advance the technology. So it's right on that way from the beginning, from 1979. So it's not something new. And the way that they do that, there are 3 ways. Here I highlight the main parts of the regulation policy and some of the main change during different periods. But the main way to entry those investments is through active joint ventures, whole foreign joint ventures, and contractual joint ventures. Contractual joint ventures are a mix of that, because active joint ventures are established by law that's a minimum capital that the foreign should invest, and the whole foreign joint venture is basically totally owned from the foreign investor, and the contractual joint venture is more flexible. But the strategic topics that appear, I will read it for you guys. It's introducing, absorbing, and applying foreign investment, advanced technology, and importing equipment and technologies for construction from China, and promoting of socialism monetization. And where this is also important thing that shows how people of China do these trials in different areas in different ways, and also expanding these areas to foreign investment as they see and as they learn how to do it in the way that is not dangerous for its own economy. And you have like the directions guide to foreign investment that says what is allowed, what's not allowed, what's encouraged, what is permitted, what's restricted, and the economic zones, as we all know, they started in the coastal cities, and then after some years started to go from other areas, and in the what I understand, and that go to western zones. It's for the 5-year plans. When you read it, it looks like it's a tool to develop in some certain areas of China. So they use also these economic zones and some preferences for investors to develop some areas that they understand that are under development comparing to other areas of China. And how? So these different ways that the foreign capital could enter in the country, you have some laws that regulate them. So saying how, and also it reinforced the idea of introduce advanced technology, improve productive quality, and expand exports, but export into order to generate foreign exchange. So they want to export to have foreign exchange, not just to export as a way to development, but a way to have foreign capital. And some of changes that happened along the time, more recently, 2019, if I'm not wrong, they have simplified the way that the capital entry in one law. That's what we are calling the new foreign investment law. And as I said, where these investments go, have the direction guide to foreign investment has become only a negative list. Before that, as you see, were 4 categories, and the preferential areas or economic or special zones, economic zones, because there are different types of economic zones, went to the western zones of the China. And now, from the beginning, the idea was to promote manufacturing activities, focus on export. And now they are more open for investment that are focused on internal market. So they are also open for the companies making profit in internal market. Well, I have a lot of slides, a lot of graphs, so I will pass a bit fast to get on the final considerations, and in the end, you guys can ask me some things. I have just put in an image some of the things that I said to understand like a timeline. This is also interesting. This is the amount of inflow of foreign direct investment, and besides what we have heard the last period, even during the COVID and the trade war with US, the companies are investing more and more in China. So you also have like I don't remember, it's around 20% of increase of investment in the last period. This during the COVID. This is the share of type of investment that happens in the China, in these 3 types that I said: the equity joint venture, the contractual joint venture, and the whole foreign enterprise that have risen and has become the majority of investments. This is the source. Mainly, the capital comes from Asian countries. Even the Western regions have some participation, but most part of the investments come from neighbors. This is the sector. This is also important, as you may see. Tiny there, no? Wait. As you may see, the manufacturing sector was representing more and became less important, and the services like financial services and real estate, especially real estate, increased a lot. This is manufacturing value added comparing to other countries. This is also important, high technology export. So China become one of the most important countries in high technology export. This is also what I'm saying the opposite, when the FDI is not exactly a main tool for development in an economic way, but is the way to transform the economic of the country to promote development, but not as a 2%. As you may see, the contribution for the growth of GDP was mainly consumed and investment. And that's it. I will finish reading this part of our interview with Vishnai Prashad. It's easy for Germans, French, in order to say China steals things. They don't steal it. They put conditions, and it is also not forced technology transfer, as the West likes to put it, but the outcome of negotiations. So that's the main thing. Sorry.
Well done. Thank you, Thomas. Okay. So I am the next presenter. I will start my screen. Oh, thank you for reminding us that we can present. I thought we couldn't because we tried earlier, but Thomas actually demonstrated we could. So I will try doing that now. Right, okay, thank you. Yes, I'm third presenter. So my title is China Economic Reforms, Purposes and Limitations. I want to make a quick introduction. Economic reforms have been ongoing in China ever since the 1980s. The departure from the Soviet planning model and the reintroduction of the market mechanism in resource allocation, particularly in labor, has raised concerns that China, under the Communist Party leadership for market reforms, is moving towards capitalism completely, even though the scale and pace of reforms are much more gradual and controlled when compared to the shock therapy in the former Soviet Union. Many heterodox economists regarded China as a neoliberal state or a variety of capitalism since market reforms. For example, Penich and Giddens regarded China as part and parcel of global capitalism and is, quote unquote, promoting the accumulation of capital in a manner that contributed to the US-led management of the international capitalist order. Joel Andreas regarded China's joining the WTO and the abolition of legal impediments to international trade and investment, and subjecting Chinese enterprises to international competition, mean that they are operating according to capitalist principles, regardless of public or private ownership. Hart-Landsberg and Burkett said China adopted a mass production, low consumption model and has serious problems of overproduction and export dependency. McNaney recognized that there are some elements which can be considered as China-specific. For example, the leading role of the state, and described it as sino-capitalism. All these theories captured a snapshot at a certain period of China economic reforms, but they are not able to explain why the supposedly neoliberal reforms have not led to the demise of the state sector, or why the US are putting tariffs and sanctions on China even at a significant cost or even loss to the US companies now, just to stop China's continued economic development, when these developments were supposedly only to enforce the US-led international capitalist order, according to some of them. More recently, Isabella Weber published a very interesting book detailing the debate and the origin of market reforms and the policies in the 80s and 90s. She tried to explain how China escaped from the shock therapy, which some of those involved in the policy making at the time were very keen of. And she found that, after all, the state maintained the capacity to insulate the economy's commanding height as it integrated into global capitalism. The reform was so-called comprehensive, but was extremely biased toward one element only of a market economy, that is, the market determination of prices. The state uses the market as a tool in the pursuit of its larger development goals. She attributed this to the nature of China's economic governance, being pragmatic and gradual. However, this still implies that the capitalism is the ultimate destination of the gradual reforms, or the only means to economic progress. I argue that China is a transitional economy after 1949. The primary task of rebuilding the country immediately started after the Civil War. The failure and lack of social revolutions in the advanced capitalist countries mean that new China has to fend off imperialist continuous and ongoing attempts to foil any development from the socialist revolution. It requires a mode of production which is for socialist accumulation, not for capitalist reproduction. I would argue that what Thomas just introduced, the first 5-year plan in 1953 was the beginning of what Soviet economist Preobrazhensky would have called primitive socialist accumulation. Primitive socialist accumulation means the proletarian regime's constant competition with domestic and international capitalist sectors, which could only end with the displacement of the bourgeoisie on a world scale. The consolidation and growth of state-owned industries and the public sector require resources from the world economy. Expropriation of the bourgeoisie from the domestic commanding heights and internal accumulation heightens the need for external connections. Atomized capitalists, that is, stripped of independent political agency, operate within a market established by and dominated by state sectors, and a financial system dominated by state banks. Capitalist profits are constrained and redirected by state planning towards social objectives, while capitalists retain a substantial share of their profit for capitalist accumulation, which funds their own consumption and reproduction. This institutional setup underpinning the Communist Party's policy of so-called utilization, restriction, and transformation of private capitalist enterprise. This has remained at the core of the PRC's economy. The law of values operates in conflict with the law of primitive socialist accumulation, which ultimately reflects the class struggle between the bourgeois forces and the historic achievements of the revolution. The opportunity for having large-scale capitalist accumulation alongside primitive socialist accumulation in China came with the changes in international development in late 1970s. Like many of the underdeveloped countries, which rely on the foreign industrial goods and machinery for systematic renewal and upgrade of industrial equipment and technical capacity, China faces the same problem of reliance. At the end of the Mao's era, the technical potential of industry introduced by Soviet Union in the 1950s was exhausted. Bottlenecks in productivity growth demand the introduction of advanced equipment and technique. These difficulties, in addition to the Sino-Soviet split, were an important consideration in Mao's rapprochement with the US. Major contracts of technical and industrial cooperation were discussed under Mao and expanded systematically after 1978. Central planning with internal accumulation alone was deemed incapable of meeting the need for modernization. Public discontent was also growing as wages and consumption had been severely restrained due to the sustained and intense internal drive for industrialization. The quest for better living conditions and reconciliation of the huge gap between China and the West, especially after officials witnessing it firsthand in the study trips to the advanced capitalist countries in the 70s, made for modernizations in agriculture, industry, science and technology, and defense, an undisputed priority across the country. The thawing of the relations with the US after Nixon's 1972 visits signaled an opportunity to access foreign capital and technology, which had thus far not been possible. The decision on reform of the economic structure adopted by the third plenary session of the 12-party Central Committee in October 1984 marked the official start of market reforms. It was built on a series of experimental trials from 1978 to 1983, including endorsing contract output to households in agricultural production, creating special industrial zones and special economic zones, reforms of state enterprises management, material allocation, wage system, and banknotes, decentralization of the state's foreign trade system, substituting profit remittance by taxation. This marked the beginning of market-based price determination and of the end of double-track system and mandatory planning. The countryside also went through dramatic changes, namely the collectivization, which was largely completed by the end of 1983. Communes and production teams were abolished and replaced by township and village enterprises. Shenzhen was one of the first special economic zones being created. These are the photos I took at the Shenzhen Museum in 2020. It showed how the reforms were introduced in the 80s, introducing the labor contract, for example, the evening schools. The mother would bring in their children to the schools to retrain, and initiative to invite foreign capital. At those times, it was predominantly from overseas Chinese or from Hong Kong to set up enterprises for export trade. Another interesting thing is that the state was directing the linkages with inland provinces to help these coastal enterprises on the coastal area to develop. Despite the political crisis, which included an attempt led by the then party secretary Zhang to make full transition to a capitalist market economy by disintegrating the institution, and subsequent readjustment after the international condemnation and sanctions after the June 4th incident, Deng Xiaoping affirmed that the continuation of the reform program in his famous Southern tour in 1992. The third plenary session of the 14th Central Committee of the CPC held in 1993 adopted the decision to establish a socialist market economic system. It confirms that the role of the market will be dominant in allocating resources, and the planned economic system will be transformed into a socialist market one, which means enterprises will be reformed based on the modern enterprise system. Public ownership will remain as the mainstay in the economic system, but other forms of ownership are encouraged. Since then, market reforms have expedited and become largely uninterrupted as political challenges to the CPC-led market reforms were severely weakened after the suppression of the political crisis in 1989. China's accession to the World Trade Organization in 2001 signified a milestone in the economic reforms and has been widely regarded as China's full integration into the US-led global economy. After strengthening the central government's position with fiscal decentralization reform in 1994, the leadership was ready to push through another wave of reform on state-owned enterprises based on the philosophy, grab the large, let go of the small, 抓大放小, in late 1995. This time was not just about internal restructuring, but involved change of ownership. 120 large enterprise groups were selected by the State Council in the 1990s to create a national team backed by preferential policies and the company law in 1995. These SOEs become separate entities from the government and are put under the management and supervision of state-owned assets supervision and administration commission of the State Council, in short, SATSEC. They is established in 2003 to exercise the government's ownership rights and to focus on maximizing of asset value and profitability using American business principles, according to Norton's study. Small and medium-sized SOEs were privatized, which led to massive unemployment, while national champions were restructured and reformed to become world beaters, but not giving up state ownership. With millions of unemployed and migrant workers from the countryside seeking non-farm income, a labor market has been created for capitalist accumulation in the favor of capital. The pro-market reforms in this period, while the state remained in control of strategic industries, led to the growth of inequalities and concentration of wealth in the emerging powerful capitalists in China. some of which became the target when the need to curb, quote unquote, the disorderly expansion of capital was recognized by the leadership and has been acted upon. Reforms on SOEs continued into the 21st century and are increasingly focused on ownership reform, signified in the 2013 Third Plenum. In some cases, private parties are allowed to take controlling stakes in the mixed ownership reform, but it can also be argued that the state is incorporating and capitalizing on the private investors into the overall plan for modernization under the CPC leadership. The Beijing Stock Exchange, which opened in November 2021, is designed to fund small and medium-sized enterprises in technological innovations, which are one of the priorities in the 14th Five-Year Plan. China's successful integration with world's capitalist market, enabling the country to have access to foreign capital and technologies, well, to a limited degree because of sanctions and export controls, has largely achieved its aim of modernization. China's agricultural productivity has vastly improved and has attained basic self-sufficiency in grain and staple food, despite having only 9% of the world's arable land and 6% of the freshwater resource. China has overtaken the USA in terms of purchasing power since 2017, according to World Bank data. China has repeatedly become the engine for global recovery at times of recessions. The contrast between the success of China's space program and the failure of NASA's recent moon rocket launch signifies that the distance between the two countries in science and technology is shortening. However, there are also serious problems generated with the growth of capitalist accumulation in China. The emergence of the super rich, some of them are officials turned capitalists at the beginning of the market reforms and became owners of the privatized state enterprises, increased inequalities to an alarming level and worsened polarization in the society. In the countryside, women were the main casualties in decollectivization as they lost their independence when the commune system was abolished and public services eroded. The campaign to end absolute poverty was to a large extent dealing with the problems left from that time. Capitalist ideology has also been dominating the cultural and economic sectors for decades and emboldened the capitalist sector and their collusion with some state officials. The dominance of the public sector, however, is still remaining as a main theme in the Chinese economy. It is also stated in the Constitution under Article 6. China is a I'm concluding now. China is a transitional economy where the law of primitive socialist accumulation and the law of value are in competition. This is the driver of its social formation, a unity of opposites between capitalist and non-capitalist elements. Capitalism in China remains dominated by the CPC regime and its social economic base. Capitalism in China remains dominated, the flourishing of private enterprises leads to inequality and capitalist accumulation, but has been restrained by state policies and the law of primitive socialist accumulation. The danger of capitalist restoration remains. However, bourgeois forces have been in decline since the world capitalist crisis in 2008 and suffered further blows with the COVID shock. Concomitantly, the CPC and state sector mobilizes to satisfy social needs and take control of sectors vacated by capitalists and impose more control on capital. A series of campaigns aimed at rebuilding the CP and restoring the leading role of official ideology have been underway. The continuing crackdown on corruption throughout the state apparatus, the elimination of absolute poverty, the campaign to remove criminal organizations, which actually netted a significant portion of the local bourgeois, which emerged in the last 2 decades, egalitarian reforms in the provision of healthcare, education, and housing, enhanced regulation on private capital, and the program of common prosperity, etc. These recent developments show the continuing dominant role of the CP in the political economy of the PRC, and the resulting reconfiguration of public and private power and property could usher in a new socioeconomic formation, which Ines Jabu argued this morning. The zigzag of CP policies since 1949, further heightened by the market reforms since 1979, signifies the oscillation between the law of value and the law of primitive socialist accumulation. Rising productivity of the state industry and its connection with the world market have brought deeper trading relationships and integration, as well as producing further contradictions between the two systems of accumulation. At the same time, it also depends on the tolerance of the imperialist power as to what extent China would be allowed to participate in the US-led global market. The banning of Chinese telecoms companies from the US market and fresh restriction on exports of US chip technology to Chinese companies is a sign that the tolerance is waning. World imperialism in decline is now determined to break primitive socialist accumulation in China. The question for us all is, all we want to see is China going to buckle or carry on its reform to achieve socialist modernization by 2035? These are from the official documents saying the outline for the plan. And as it said in the plan, it is still ongoing and the aim has not changed. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we also have the last presenter, Alicia. Is she here today? Alicia here because she hasn't shown up here and also not online. Alicia, if you are here, please unmute yourself. If not, then I think we will just go straight into Q&A session. We have about, yes, half an hour for that. The floor is open. Any comments, any questions? Please. Yes. Sorry, because we have online attendees, so they cannot hear you from where you are. So we will have to ask you to come to the front if you don't mind. Thank you.
So my first question is only technical. Your presentation will be uploaded, so it
Yes.
because yeah, okay.
We are going to upload the files that's sent by the presenters to our website, so I will circulate it when this is available. Yes.
Okay. So my topical question is, did you ever compare these reforms since the 70s with the reforms in the East European countries, beginning with the 60s? So under Khrushchev, there were, for example, Lieberman, he was very famous to have a concept for reforms, and the Polish and also the Hungarian state had some reforms. But my question is, what about comparisons of reforms in Eastern Europe and the failed reforms in Eastern Europe? Why didn't they fail? China, what is the difference? Why? And for example, what I never understood is the Chinese do very criticize Khrushchev because he did some bad things to China, but essentially in the economic field, he wanted to have exactly these reforms like Deng Xiaoping, for example, I think, but the Chinese, they do not appreciate Khrushchev at all, because I understand one thing, but I do not understand the economic thing, because it's very similar. Okay.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else? We can collect a few, and then before we go to the answering. If not, then I will just. Oh, sorry. Yes, Alberto. Yes.
There's no last. So the question is for you. Is the push of people from the countryside to the cities, would you regard that as a part of the primitive socialist accumulation? And if so, how does it differ from your origin, the primitive accumulation, the standard capitalist primitive accumulation?
Thank you. Yes, I think I will answer quickly the first two questions. Thank you for your comment. Yes, comparison with the Eastern European countries at those time, or the parts of former Soviet Union. I didn't compare it myself, but Isabella Weber did a very good book on that, and just detailed how the reforms were discussed. And in fact, many of the officials went on the study trips to the Eastern European countries in the 70s, and quite a lot of them were like admiring the reforms there, and try to a part of them, some of them wanted this to be implemented in China, but that traction didn't succeed. So they knew that the reforms could be, some part of it can be imitated by from the Eastern European countries, but they cannot completely copy it, because, for example, the inflation in the Eastern European countries, they knew that this is going to be destructive to China. So there were quite a lot of resistance in the debate and how to formulate the policy at that time, whether to adopt it fully or not. So Isabella did a good job in showing the discussions and also the context of this debate at the time. And if you look at politically in the 1989, Zhao Ziyang is representing the people who want a complete reform done to disintegrate the institution completely and move into a full capitalist market economy, but he didn't succeed. So there is also a political struggle in the leadership that that made China's today. Don't know if I answered all your questions, or what's the second question? Yeah, Khrushchev. I have to say I do not know too much about it, but the Sino-Soviet split at that time was, I don't think it's just only about economy, how to run your economy. It's also about maintain the independence from the Soviet Union, because China under Mao has always been very conscious that they need to, make use of the help from the Soviet Union, but at the same time have an independent policy of their own. So there were some political conflicts at those times. So they were not, that it's contributed to the split. But I have to say, for this area, I do not know too much. So it's something that I want to, the next stage, will want to learn. And the question from Alberto, yes, the moving, or not really like intentionally moving them forcefully, but the process of the rural population going into the city and finding jobs and becoming workers themselves, this process, I would consider it as part of primitive socialist accumulation. The term itself, I would say, is actually quite contradictory, because if you're talking about socialist accumulation, why you have to say it is primitive? Because there are some characteristics which is quite similar to primitive social capitalist accumulation, the process of, for example, proletarianization of the masses. But it is also depending on how the state, when it is not a capitalist state, how to address these problems, not allowing the capitalist problems to just extend and take control of the whole economy. So there were a lot of different programs in place to ameliorate the effects of this process. But yes, there are a lot of similarities if you just compare the commodification of labor in this process, but this is not the whole picture, I'll say. Okay, sorry, yes, there's a question from Ted Wing. Yes, please unmute yourself and yes, you can talk.
Oops. sorry, I'm just trying to.
Yeah,
okay.
Right, thank you.
Sorry for the technical error. I want to ask you, Sam-Kee, how would you make sense of the recent bursts of the real estate bubble? Because how would you consider the real estate sector as part of the capital accumulation process? Because as we know, in the last 2-3 decades, the property sector has been the engine of growth in China. That has been a driving force for lots of economic growth. And almost all state enterprises have had a hand in the property sectors because that's the promise for huge profits. And that's also tied in with local finance for governments, because governments relied a lot on land sales and also property tax for their local incomes. And because of that, that's also is a driving force for proletarianizations, because a lot of the farmers were driven out of their own land by these property developers in a process more or less fall in lines with Harvey's ideas of accumulation by dispossession. So how would you make sense of these bubble bursts in the last 1 or 2 years?
Thank you. Yes, very good question. Quickly answering to your question is, yeah, the real developer, they are part of the capitalist, that is emerging capitalist power in China. So they made use of the policy and enrich themselves through speculation and land sales, and sometimes corrupting the officials so that they can really circumventing the regulations that restrict their power. But at the same time, the land development, the policy for land use and the is not entirely just for the benefit of the capitalists, because, for example, during the special economic zones and industrial zones, those kind of things, they actually made use of selling of land to provide the capital they needed. Otherwise, they would not have had to put in infrastructure, do the implement the development plans. So they actually using this market to develop themselves, to achieve some of the fundamental goals. However, in the process of it, it's not just entirely just one way. So there are different forces at play. So they would make use of this and benefit themselves. The burst of the we are seeing now is a serious problem. But at the same time, you can see that China, the government, is always having some ability to address this. If this has happened in a fully capitalist economy, you kind of expect what's going to come, a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of unemployment, and yes, it's disastrous to the economy. But because of the government still having a powerful state sector, then they can actually buy back this company, for example, or use the newly built unsold housing for other use, not definitely just for sale in the market. So there are lots of innovative ways that you can see how China is dealing with this. So I think, yes, this is just another example to show. Sorry, I don't want to take up too much time of myself. I will let other people to ask questions, and yes, Pilia, sorry, and then please come over.
Congrats, Sam-Kee, for your brilliant research. I read your last paper to this conference and your first paper to in the radical review. What's the situation? It's a theoretical and historical question. What's the situation of your approach supported by socialist primitive accumulation in a process in China nowadays where the state, the public sector advanced in private sector? For example, 5 years ago, only 5% of assets of private enterprise are owned by states. Now, 25% of the assets in the private properties are in the hands of states. What I think about that, and I want to know your point. In China now, there is a combination between the different public forms of property with the private forms of property. In combination, China generating new historical forms of property. How the situation of the primitive socialist accumulation phases during these dynamics in China, because it's very different from Soviet Union, different from Probazinski think about one century ago, but the concept is brilliant to understand now, to understand China now. Thank you.
Thank you. Elle, you want to come on?
Yeah, I wanted to ask just a couple of questions. First of all, phenomenal presentations, Tomás. Yeah, very informative. Thank you, great. Sam-Kee, of course, great. Lots of information. I want to ask a very simple question to Tomás, and then I want to throw out an idea and see what he thinks about that. And then I want to ask complicated questions to Sam-Kee to give her a hard time. So, Tomás, one idea on foreign direct investment is that the West was very open and even promoted investing foreign direct investment into China, very much because they believed that the ideology of capitalism would overwhelm them and they were going to be won over to a full neoliberal agenda and so forth and so on. And that went on for maybe 20 years or so. And we all know that starting at least 5 years ago, they began to change that, and very rapidly now they are becoming very aggressive against China in their economic policy. So far, that's all, but we'll see what they do next. And so what I'd like to know, the simple question is, tracking for 30 years or so, has foreign direct investment as a percentage of the GDP dropped in recent times? And in particular, foreign direct investment that comes out of the United States and in Europe, the places where they're looking to bring in technology along with that. So can you actually see that in the statistics, this turn that United States in particular has made, but it's gotten Europe to go along with somewhat, to start to economically interact with China differently with regard to FDI? Can you see that? And the second question I want to ask, which is more vague, is that, the way you presented it was really great. This is what happened. These are the facts. And that's a little bit like what I think we ought to be doing who are not in China, because the Chinese are going to make a decision how to run China, fortunately. But in any case, that's good. But I want to bring up the question of popular participation in the whole process that they're carrying out of foreign direct investment, of the openness policy stuff. And what I want to know is, not like, oh, I'm a radical, I'm for direct participation, it's not real, et cetera, you are building socialism, you aren't building socialism, not that. I just want to know what the government, in all these policies which you brought out, what is the government saying about any popular participation in it? And I'm not even interested in judging about whether what they say is true or not. That's something which has to be done. But it makes a difference whether they don't mention it at all. In other words, whether their vision is entirely that the government is an elite group that is going to direct things as benevolent dictators, or whether they're actually interested in developing the capabilities of the population to participate in all these things. So are they saying anything in these discussions? You may have to look at that and stuff like that. But I'm saying, if you do say something about this, say it in the way that you've said all your other stuff. Here's what they say, here's what they do, not like, oh, this is good, this is bad, and so forth. So that's just something, that's one element which obviously you didn't mention that. Sam-Kee, what I want to ask you, to give you a hard time, is, you mentioned that they passed the decision where they were going to move from a planned economic system to a market socialist system. And the word market socialist is really a little bit tricky. The question is exactly what do you mean by that? Because I consider there's two very different things which people very often just throw out and don't make any distinction between. So when they move from a planned economy, well, what they certainly moved from was a quantitatively planned economy as of the old Soviet Union. And what I'm really asking you is, do they still actually have a planned economy? Because I do not buy the belief that there is an automatic contradiction between planning an economy and having markets. There is a difference between planning an economy, the government, society as a whole, planning an economy, and having actual production made by individual capitalists that own capital for the purpose of expanding their capital and stuff like that. That's different. That's actual production determined by the drive of capital to expand itself. But if you use markets, not capitalist markets, but just markets as exchange mechanisms, you know, the idea of Pat Devine, you know, the difference between market forces and market mechanisms, there's a question whether it can be done or not. But if they are able, because it seems to me that the Chinese government has a lot of control. They politically decide what branches they want to develop, and you know, they shape where the economy is going. And some people just say that's just industrial planning. But the line between industrial planning and planning an economy, I mean, planning an economy in the broad sense of the terms, the words in English are society as a whole, whether it's the government or some other thing, decides what we want to produce and find some way to produce it. And it doesn't have to be the old Soviet way of quantitative planning to be planning. If they're able to actually cause the economy to turn out something close to what they wanted, and for God's sakes, the Soviets never got exactly what they thought with their system. They were lucky if they got close to what they were trying to do. If they can actually get something close to it, then they actually have a planned economy. So what I'm asking you is, do you think the degree of control by the Chinese government over what its economy does, where it develops, what it produces, but what directions it goes, where its investment is, et cetera, do you think they could still be called a planned economy, even though they have obviously market mechanisms built into this?
Well, thank you very much for the questions. I will see if I can open my presentation, because I think I have some data about that things that you asked me.
Remember to share it for the online audience.
Yeah, I'm not, how should I do it? Condividi, claro. I think now it's working, huh? So here are some data about the source of the foreign direct investment in China. And the point is that US and Europe, they never have been so relevant in a total amount of investment. If you look at the big picture, they were never have been so relevant as we see now, because we see notice, paper and journal, I think people saying a lot of shit, but it's not true. When we see the data, they were not relevant. You know, as you can see, like the Asian countries are much more relevant than the US and Europe. So when we say in total amount, maybe we want to go deeper and discuss bringing in technology. That is the main strategy. Maybe they are more important but the data cannot show. Maybe we need a deeper research to understand that. But in total amount is not important. And as you can see, it's just growing, the total amount. It's never have. I mean, you have some drop downs here in the end of 90s, but basically the trend is like rising, super rising, and then the last years rising more than. That's very important. Yeah. So it's difficult to understand because it's overvaluated, I'm sure. The whole of US investments and Europe investment are overvaluated because we are in this position. We are looking to China from here, from Europe, and from America. So naturally, and they have the control of the media and things like that. So they push it to become more important than it really is. So I don't know, it's difficult to answer the real importance of the investments of USA and Europe. But when you see the data, it's not so relevant as they claim to be. The other question that you said, I don't know if I have wrote here, but the 5-year plans, they are, and also the foreign investments decisions, they need to pass through many instances inside the country. It's not only the Communist Party that decide that. So there's a lot of instances inside the government, and then that people are allowed to participate and to give opinions. Also that the 5-year plan and the regulation, they go forward and they get back and they change, and they have some relations to 10 years to be approved because of that intense discussions inside the government and the people, the political stances. They are very intensely debated. So these key issues are passed through many different stances. Maybe Sam-Kee could tell you which stance, but the National Public Congress is one of the biggest instances that it needs to be debated, all those things, and to be approved, and then they have many stances that we have no idea. That's what I'm saying. This is a more discussed in China than we discuss it here. That's it.
Thank you for the very good questions from both Al and Elias. I would think I will do it in Al's sequence and then come to Elias. Is it a plan? Well, talking about the market social systems, that is not how I would like to term it, but it's the official name they called it. So for me, is recognizing that in a transitional stage, they cannot do without, or just thinking we can just wish away the law of value. So it's just a recognition that they still have to operate within a capitalist economy, world economy. So how to survive that? So they have to make sense of their change of track, because there has been some serious debate even before the formal announcement of the market reforms. They have to come into some consensus. How can they explain themselves to allow market to exist? When in the 60s, official documents have always said that we have overcome capitalism and we are now in the socialism. So there will be no law of value and market will not exist. So they have to justify the change of direction. At the same time, have to maintain the dominance of the Communist Party in making all these reforms. So yes, but if you ask me, is it still a planned economy? I think a lot of signs to say that it is. It's just not the way that we used to see it, like how the Soviets would have done, like everything just being told to produce whatever, disregard of the prices, not balancing the book properly. So I think the Chinese economy today, as Isabella Weber has said, that the main point is the determination of prices is by the market. So that is the main thing in the economy, in the market reforms. So I think it's in a way that the Chinese decision makers want to make sure that economy is operating as efficiently as any other capitalist economies. If the other capitalist economies are still operating according to that efficiency. So at first they think we need to do things more effectively, efficiently, and do not just artificially make sense. And you said that what do we want to decide to produce is a way of is a characteristic of a planning economy. And I think in the past it was quite impossible to achieve that because there's lack of data. And basically just think about yourself, someone told you what you can consume, what you can go, where can you work, all these things, you feel like you're being dictated to do, even though maybe in the large scheme of things, it's actually for the benefit of the whole society, but being forced to do or accept something that you don't want is not, it will generate quite a lot of other problems. So that is not an efficient way of planning. Today, we have the technology with great data collection, and people's habit, how they consume, whatever, can be easily collected with technology and data. So this is making a new way to the planner. If Elias was saying this morning, there were 2 million people involved in economic planning in China. So I think without the data technology, there would have to be at least double the size, and it will be quite a lot of complaints they have to deal with it at the same time. So I think there is an opportunity for that. So this comes to the question of the property in the form in this period. How do we see it? I think, yes, like you said, Preobrazhensky, at that time, we're trying to give this idea. So it cannot be very concrete. And at the time, it wasn't really quite possible for him to think too concretely how it should be. The property form, I know that you have a theory to say that it's a new socioeconomic formation, including how property is now built. I think we can only trace the possibilities by looking at what's happening in China. For example, the real estate companies, when they're at the brink of bankruptcy and what it's going to be like, maybe the state will take ownership of them and then revive it. So what kind of property relation or form is that called? Do you just call it just a state property or whatever? So this is a new way of things that we are now witnessing. So we may not have a name for it, but I think there are some new things that is emerging, and with the ability of technology, which may open the flight, and we can see how it's going to happen. So yeah, please.
I have just a question in relation to planning and the points that you have just repeated. What I understood, everybody have listened about social credit system in China, and it was commented in the West as a new censorship everywhere, digital surveillance, etc. But I read the reports from a German think tank, Marques, who said the 2 reports by Chinese that the social credit system is mainly a planning mechanism which mobilize Internet of Things, and it's applied.
The last sentence, that airplane.
Okay. So it's 2 reports written by a Chinese researcher in Marques Institute, German, who said that social credit system is mainly applied to economic level, to enterprises, corporation, not at the individual level as we listened in the media and propaganda campaign. And it seemed, what I understood, that it is a new mechanism for planning, which use huge data, Internet of Things. And according to this mechanism, there is a set of objectives defined for different sectors to achieve ecological, social, and economic at the level of productivity, new technologies, etc. So my question, I have only these 2 reports. They don't say clearly that it's planning, but what I understand, it's planning, it's a new technology of planning. So you reveal this idea. Can you develop a little bit, if you have any information, if it is really applied in China and which level?
Unfortunately, I don't really have that information myself at the moment. I think this is still new and developing, so I can't say too much because I don't know. Yes, on the other hand, one obstacle at the moment is quite a lot of these data center or businesses that own a lot of data. They are privately owned. So to make sure that go to the social needs and used for planning, these private sectors has to become part of the state. But so I think there is maybe some action on that front. Okay, Paul, sorry, I have not seen your hand before. So just please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, this is Paul Zaremka. I just want to ask Tomás a very simple question. He puts Hong Kong in as a country separate from China in that foreign direct investment data. Suppose you put Hong Kong inside China, then what happens with all that data?
Yeah. Okay. Just before Tomás, I have a question for Professor Feng. Because you did suggest that one of the things that need to be done to limit the scale of speculation in the exchange in the renminbi, and you suggested more regulations in the exchange, the places doing exchanges. But if you are promoting internationalization of renminbi, how can that be possible? Because you're opening your market for currency exchange, and you may be able to do regulations inside China, but not outside. So how would that be possible? Thomas, you want to come first, and then I will let them.
No, about the data, it's not that I separated. It's something that comes from the National Bureau of Statistics of China. So they separated it. It's not that I do it. And there's a difference because Hong Kong is also a financial center, as we know, and it has some preferences for investors from Hong Kong. So you have many data that is kind to be that's not so prestigious because they have investments that come from China, go through Hong Kong, and come back to China to have preferential taxes and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. This was the question. I didn't separate it. It's some data that I collect from the Chinese Bureau of Statistics, and they separate it. But
no, but if I could elaborate on what I meant to say, I don't care where the data comes from.
Yeah.
But just putting Hong Kong back into China for exactly the reasons you mentioned, that money goes back and forth, would give you a very different picture.
Sorry, can you wait a minute? It's,
One important information for lunches: you have 3 food positions on the ground floor where you can get food, and then you can decide either to stay on the ground floor, to go outside, or to go on floor number 2, where there are a few tables that you can sit and have your lunch. Okay? Have a nice lunch.
okay, sorry. Paul?
Yeah, no, so I was just saying, I don't really care where the data come from, but if the monies are coming back and forth between the so-called mainland and Hong Kong, then that's all the more reason to not separate out Hong Kong in your analysis.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, but it's difficult to understand when this I don't have like this. So maybe I don't know if you have some suggestion where to find the source, but I can find where it comes from, the investments that go through Hong Kong, because some of them are real and some of them are round trip. There are some estimations from the UNCTAD that show how much is round trip, how much not round trip, but I do not have exactly data. I could do that if you suggest me some source to understand how much of this money is real or how much is round trip, and because also some money comes from other countries like Virgin Islands and things like that that's not originally from these places. So yeah, this data is not exactly data, but is approximate, you know.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Professor Feng, please.
Okay, I would like to answer this question that in nowadays today, the financial market of China is not.
Tables and seats for lunches are available on floor 2.
Sorry, there's another announcement. Yeah. Okay, I think they finished now. Yeah, you can continue.
Okay. Nowadays, the financial market of China is not strong enough to meet the related financial risk if it's totally open its currency account. So this must be a long process, and the Chinese government take different steps will take different steps. And the development of offshore RMB markets is a way of opening and entering the world financial market. But of course, it's with a lot of limitations in this way. And in the short term, we take some steps and open some parts to open some parts, but the final target will be in long term is we open the currency market and enter into the world currency market. So with a lot of preparations to be done in the future, and after such like we need to build up our own mechanism, the supervision, internal supervision mechanism, and legal system, and so on. So the final target will be it's in the final target is would not be realized in a short time, I think. So this is the reason why we need to talk a lot or study a lot in this about this question, and how we can progress how we can get progressed faster, and what should we do in the future to make our wish realized. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we will have to end here now. We have got 2 announcements for lunch. I wish you guys online can join us as well, but yes, but it's already very good that we have seen you participating in this very stimulating debate. Thank you. So we are back at 2:15 or 2:30. Okay, 2:30, great. So we will have an hour and a bit for lunch. So we come back at 2:30. Thank you, bye.